What up, Wizards? It's Dev from The Place, and today we got our very first Spider-Man standard deck tech. Who am I kidding? We got our very first Through the Omen Pass standard deck tech. You're not playing Spider-Man standard in paper, are you? Are you? Let me know if you are, actually, in the comments section. I'm gathering data for science or something. Either way, I guess that means this is not really a Lady Octopus inspired inventor deck tech. This is in fact a Murata. What's her name? It is Murata. It's Murata Neuron Hacker. That's what kind of deck tech this is. I can kind of relate to this lady, you know? People say she's a neuron hacker. People say I'm a hack. So we have that bond. But we also have a bond because I really like cool magic cards. And Spider-Man said or not, cool magic card alert. Hey, everybody, look over here. Cool magic card alert. What did she even do, actually? Hey, Ziggy's here now, everybody. That's good news. Lady Octopus over here, though, and I am going to call her Lady Octopus in this video because then it gives me the ability to make tentacle jokes if I feel like it. Yeah, I might feel like it later. This is just a single blue mana for a creature with no power, so don't worry about attacking with her. Although, I guess more on that later, but this gets a special little counter whenever you draw your first or second card of any turn. And then you can tap her down whenever you feel like it to cast an artifact with mana value equal to or less than the number of counters that she has on her. So the second turn she's in play, she can drop a 1-drop. If you draw a second card in that turn, she can drop a 2-drop the second turn she's in play. And very quickly, she's going to start basically being ramp for you. This can easily produce 3 or 4 mana in a turn if she's out for just a couple of turns. But maybe even better than that is the thing the card doesn't tell you when you read it, and that is that you can use this ability anytime you want to. It's not just whenever you could otherwise cast an artifact. You can drop whatever artifact you want on your opponent's turn with Lady Octopus because that's how the ability works. Don't think I'm right. I've got it on video. We'll see it in the example game later. This does in fact allow you to cast artifacts on your opponent's turn through the use of her ability, and that can be ridiculous when you're casting an artifact that basically doubles as a removal spell, or even just a regular old artifact creature they didn't expect you to be able to block with. It's a really powerful ability. Now right now, Octomom will run you about $3 to get a paper copy of, which is a little bit worrying because like 4 days ago they were $2.40, and usually cards don't trend upwards very much during the end of presale season. They trend way downwards. So there must be a lot of people somewhere who have faith in this card. And I imagine they're all CEDH players. I've seen a lot of competitive EDH players tripping over themselves to try to make decks with this card lately. So that's probably what's going on, but I still think there's got to be something you can do with this card in Standard, and after a few days in the arena of throwing different noodles against the wall, I think I finally got a couple that stuck. So today, let's look at Is It Lady Octopus?
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
And we're back. Quick plug for the Patreon, by the way. If you wanted to see Anti-Venom first, should have been there, man. Only like 3 votes separated this deck from Anti-Venom on Patreon. So if you wanted to see that one first, should have been there to vote, dog. It's just $1 a month to do that on Patreon. And I'll leave a link in the description that you'll probably have to paste into your address bar. I apologize in advance, but let's go ahead and start talking about this deck because that's what all those people on Patreon pay me to do, is talk about this card, which I'm going to do a little bit more before we get into what we're playing in the rest of this deck, because I have seen this deck built a bunch of ways online so far in the preseason, and wow, is all I'm going to say. You know, as a content creator, when you're building a deck, and this is true of not even content creators, when you're building a deck, you go to Moxfield sometimes, you go to other sites, or maybe you just go to Google and you type in like standard deck with this card. And I did that this preseason, and I saw some of the wildest lists I've ever seen after having typed in a card plus standard decks. There are people out there, a lot of them, trying to play like Darksteel Colossus in this deck. It doesn't work that way. Don't do it. Don't do it to yourself. It's not going to work. No, instead you learn pretty quick when you're messing around with this deck in the arena that the worst thing you can do is include a bunch of like even 6 and 7 drop artifacts. Your dreams of including the end stone in this deck are dumb and wrong, and you should be ashamed, it turns out. And that's a lesson I had to learn for myself. This deck needs to be a lot more efficient than I've seen a lot of people trying to make it be online. We are not playing Commander in Standard, and you are not dropping a Darksteel Colossus off of this card. Now, instead, the most mana you can feasibly expect this to really make for you is 4. You probably want to stop your deck at 4 drops, and to be honest, I've only included a couple of them in this deck, and that's only because it works particularly well with Lady Octopus. We'll get to what it is in a minute, but one way or the other, the first PSA I want to deliver when building this deck and telling the entire internet about it is that you really don't want like 10 cost artifacts. That is not the way to play this deck. So again, just one more time, cut it out if you're doing that. If I really was a hack, this is where I would include the Michael Jordan saying stop it meme, but I'm not. So I'll just say stop it for your own good because I care about you. Again, this deck needs to be efficient, and that is because, and I know not everybody likes to hear this all the time, but Lady Octopus not only does die to like every removal spell in the format, you know, they're going to Torch the Tower this or Burst Lightning or Tragic Trajectory or whatever. You have to be expecting that on turn 1. But even if it doesn't die to removal, you're not going to get it on turn 1 every single game, even after a mulligan. So your deck needs to be able to win games when it doesn't draw this card or get to keep this card once it's resolved. So with that in mind, maybe don't play a bunch of 10, 11 drop artifacts in your deck. Cue the Pro Tour being won by Darksteel Octopus. That'll probably happen now. I brought that evil into the world. But what else are we playing in this deck? Like, we can't play a bunch of exciting 5 and 6 drops artifacts. Sorry, Dad, Dev. What you gotta ruin all of our fun. Then what are we actually doing in this deck? The first thing we need to do is win games. We need to actually find a way to win a game of Magic. And one of the best ways of doing that is Astrologian's Planisphere, which is somehow still only 35 cents. This card is outrageous. I feel like with how successful the card has been in Standard, maybe it should be $5-7 right now, but don't tell anybody that because I think 35 cents is a steal. You can get a play set for like $1.50. That is wild because this is easily the most aggressive, most winningest card in this deck. You see, there's 29 non-creature spells in this deck. We've got Lady Octopus, we've got a 4 of another creature, and that is it, son. There's no more creatures in this deck beyond just a couple that we're playing, but Astrologian's Planisphere is basically a creature that triggers itself when you play another copy. We're drawing a bunch of cards in this deck, so that's another way to trigger Planisphere. And you can even just go on your Lady Octopus, I guess, if you did want to attack with her. I told you we'd talk about it later. If you did want to attack with Lady Octopus, just suit her up with a Planisphere. She'll get huge in no time. So even if you lose the creature that job selects onto it when you play it in the first place, you probably have a creature laying around to buckle it onto. That might sound weird considering I just said there's only a few creatures in the deck, but we're also playing a 4 of Pinnacle Emissary in here, so we will have creatures flying around. This is going to give us a 1/1 flyer whenever we play an artifact spell, which is dope because we have 27 of those. So in case I need to remind you of the numbers, 29 non-creatures for Planisphere, 27 artifact spells for Pinnacle Emissary, and that again is going to lead to an army of little dudes just flying around. You know, we can always throw, again, a Planisphere on a flyer and start going to town with that. We've got a couple of other ways to make these flyers slightly larger too. So just the 1/1 flyers are kind of another way that we're going to carve a path to victory if the Planisphere doesn't do it. But note that the Emissary is a pretty meaty flyer for the most part itself, so it can get through for some damage when it needs to. And Emissary is especially good with Lady Octopus because come the turn that you actually have 3 counters on her, you can just tap her to throw down Pinnacle Emissary, and now you've got all your mana untapped to cast artifacts. So you get your Pinnacle Emissary for free, throw down 2-3 artifacts, and now you've got 2-3 flyers sitting there the same turn that you played Emissary. A lot of burst board presence comes out of this card, and it's another big reason we can actually win games with this deck. But that's not all that makes a bunch of little 1/1 flyers. There was a card in this deck that I was just not sure about when I first started including it. It was a 2 of, quickly worked its way up to a 4 of. It turns out Thopter Fabricator is actually a real Magic card. This is another one you can get for like 25-30 cents right now. Does all of the work in the world. It's kind of like a Mischievous Mystic in some ways, right? When you draw your second card of the turn, you get a 1/1. That's really all it does, but in the meantime, between time, it's also a fairly easy to crew big old flyer that you can also just throw an equipment on some of the time if you got the extra mana laying around, and that'll do the trick. But a lot of the times, this is an artifact, so it just procs Pinnacle Emissary. It's a non-creature spell when you cast it, so it will also trigger Astrologian's Planisphere. It's an artifact you can throw down for free with Lady Octopus, and then maybe draw your second card of the turn using your mana and go ahead and get a 1/1. Pinnacle Emissary and even this, Thopter Fabricator have had some problems in Standard so far. You often have to wait a turn to untap with them in play and start doing stuff, but that's not true when you get them for free. Now, if you're going to draw all these cards, not just for Lady Octopus, but also Thopter Fabricator to make dudes for us, we got to play some cards that do that, and it would be nice if they were artifacts for the most part. Cryogen Relic fits the bill perfectly. This is only a couple of mana to draw a card when it comes into play. We can play it at instant speed with Lady Octopus, and that'll matter some of the time. End of turn, you'll just throw down a Cryogen Relic and draw a card before you untap for your turn. That feels good, but we can also use this as kind of a pseudo removal or tempo spell, and that'll draw cards too. So this is a card that actually draws multiple cards on multiple turns, which is especially good for things like Lady Octopus and Thopter Fabricator that kind of want you to limit the number of cards you're actually drawing in a turn, right? Anything beyond the second card you draw really doesn't give you too much value, so it's kind of nice to have a card that can draw cards on subsequent turns, one after the other. We're also playing opt-in here, not an artifact, doesn't matter, just draw a card for a single mana. You get to kind of fix that draw before you do it. Excellent for a single mana. Wonderful. You know, if we're going to be casting our artifacts for free anyway, we might as well have a couple of non-artifact spells in the deck, you know, because we get our artifacts for free. We can use our actual mana on stuff like Opt. I like that. But we've also got a couple of copies of Broadside Barrage in the deck. This is a removal spell that draws a card. So again, a removal spell that pays us a 1/1 flyer from Fabricator, or a removal spell that puts a counter on Lady Octopus. That's amazing. We need a spell in our Izzet deck that does a little bit extra damage anyway, you know, because we're mostly working off red removal. And rather than play something like Twin Maw Stormbrood, for instance, a lot of the red decks are playing, I think our 5 damage spell will be one that also draws a card. But we're not quite done drawing cards right now. One of my favorite card draw spells, in like massive air quotes in this deck, is actually Soul Guide Lantern over here. This accomplishes like 4 different things, 5 really for this deck. Let me see if I can peel them all off. 1, we need 1-drop artifacts somewhere in this deck because there's going to be turns in the early game where Lady Octopus has 1 counter on her. So it'd be nice to have at least 1 or 2 1-drop artifacts in here. Number 2, it is a non-creature spell for the Astrologian's Planisphere. Number 3, it is an artifact for the Pinnacle Emissary. Number 4, it draws cards for both Thopter Fabricator and Lady Octopus. And number 5, it'll mess around with like VV Cauldron decks when they go to target the VV in the yard with the Cauldron. You can use a Soul Guide Lantern to get rid of it. You know what I mean? So actually kind of a lot of things this card does right now, not just in this deck, but in this format. And it's one of the most efficient ways to draw a card on an artifact too. Now we'll finish the deck off with what removal we're playing, and that is all artifacts. You would expect. We're playing 4 copies of Legion Extruder to start things off here. This is another thing that can make creatures for us, and we will have some creatures or some artifacts that we don't mind sacrificing. Sack a Cryogenic Relic, draw a card, make a creature. Sounds great, but this is also a removal spell that we can turn into an instant speed removal spell with Lady Octopus. Definitely worth playing. Same thing goes for Chainsaw, a 2-mana removal spell that now functions kind of like a lightning strike. You know, we can play this at instant speed with Lady Octopus on the table, and that is wonderful. But this is another thing that once a couple of creatures have died, we can suit up one of those 1/1 flyers from Pinnacle Emissary or something like that and get in for a couple of extra damage, and that can be really important. Apart from that, there's 1 copy of Warmaker Gunship. I started off on 3 and quickly realized that we don't need all of this removal. You know, we've got like Broadside Barrage, Chainsaw, we got Legion Extruder. I mean, there's some removal in this deck, so I didn't need all the copies of this in the world, but I stuck with 1 because we still need some 3-drop artifacts, and it's not like this is the only one, but we need a fair number of 3-drop artifacts because the numbers that Lady Octopus is going to be on the vast majority of the time are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So we needed 3s in the deck, and I felt like this is a good inclusion. We can station this and attack with it later if that's what we want to do, I guess, but as a removal spell that triggers our non-creature spell thing and our artifact spell thing, I think it's pretty decent. But the last card we're playing in the main deck, non-land I guess, is the 2 copies of Boommobile. I told you we were playing a 4-drop in here that works particularly well with Lady Octopus. This is it. Do you get it now? You can play Boommobile for effectively free, and it's going to give you the 4 mana when it comes into play regardless. You have to use that on activated abilities or whatever, but you just use it on Boommobile like you were going to do anyway. The difference is that now you got all your mana available to you too. So if you have 4 mana plus the 4 mana that Boommobile gave you, now you can deal like 5 damage to a thing, which is pretty good soup. Also worth noting that this does damage to any target, so there's going to be times where you've gotten your opponent down to like 7 and you just killed him with the Boommobile, so it's kind of like having a big old fireball on your deck. I like that, but you can also just tap down a couple of little dudes or 1 smallish guy, like get in for 6 damage. That's pretty sick too, so we have a lot of creatures in our deck that aren't technically creatures and are also removal or card draw spells. I like that about this deck. Generally, I know that people are going to look at this and be like, first of all, that's from Ether Drift, idiot. So yeah, I like Ether Drift more than a lot of folks, but also, yeah, I know the card hasn't seen all the play in the world since it hit standard, but this is the perfect pile for it. So I like the cards that go boom. Now there's 23 lands in the deck. Sorry to tank the budget the way I'm doing. the budget was kind of fine until we got to exactly right here. And like River Power Verges cost what, like $12, $13? It's ludicrous. But I guess you could just play like, you know, mountains and islands if you wanted to. That would also work, but I think you do need to work Fountain Port into the deck as a 1 or a 2 up. This can make artifacts for us, and that's kind of slick. It can draw cards for us some of the time if we sack tokens. That will, you know, give us more tokens with Fabricator or put counters on Lady Octopus or whatever. So there's a lot to be said for having Fountain Port in the deck, but for the most part, just try to make blue and red mana as best you can. Now let's glide toward that sideboard real quick. We're playing 2 copies of Ghost Vacuum in this bad boy, as you might expect. We're playing that in every sideboard and standard anyway. We're definitely going to do it in the deck that wants to play artifacts. It also gives us more 1-drop artifacts. So does the extra copy of Soul Guide Lantern. We're playing this in lieu of a 3rd copy of Ghost Vacuum because it draws cards. We've also got Unable to Scream in the 1-drop slot in the board here. This is going to hit that Vivi Ornate pretty hard. Is it Orniteer? That Vivi Orniteer pretty hard, but it's good against a bunch of creatures in standard right now. We've got Negate in here because we're playing islands, so you play Negate in the sideboard. There's 2 more Broadside Barrage to take out large-ish creatures if we want to, and then the weirdest looking cards in the board are the 2 copies of Synthesizer Lab Ship, which is mostly for long game against decks that play a bunch of sweepers. Blue-white control is what you need to be thinking here, and Scrawling Crawler in here, which I have put into the board mostly against decks that are going to want to draw a bunch of cards anyway, you know, like Vivi. That's a good deck right now. And even Dimir, which is kind of like the 2nd best deck. They have Enduring Curiosity. If you can keep that Scrawling Crawler out and stick it, then suddenly them drawing all them cards doesn't seem so great. And sometimes you can even line it up to where if they're going to draw 3 or 4 off of Enduring Curiosity, you can just tap down Lady Octopus to throw down Scrawling Crawler in response to the first card draw trigger. It's ridiculous. They might take a bolt's worth of damage out of nowhere, and that could be the difference. So Scrawling Crawler is just like really neat. Now here are your power rankings. A final score of 67, which is not the best score in the world, but it's also not a bad score. Note, probably the most important thing to take away from these power rankings is that the deck doesn't do anything poorly. Usually there's a deck with like a 4 or 5 in one category, but this deck doesn't really dip too far into any one category, you know. We've got a decent, although not stellar defense because we have a lot of removal, although not all of it takes out very large creatures, so you have to keep that in mind. As far as our offense goes, it's a relatively high number. We got a board full of little attacking tokens, but at the end of the day, they're just still little attacking tokens. So if there's a weakness the deck has, is that none of these numbers go particularly high, except for maybe Synergy, but none of these numbers really go low either, which is a strength for the deck. But the real strength of this deck kind of goes back to what I was telling you at the very beginning of the video, you know? You can't really play huge, expensive artifacts that are going to gum up your hand if you don't have Lady Octopus, that take forever to get to with Lady Octopus and play for multiple turns anyway. What you actually need is a deck that can win completely absent of Lady Octopus, and that is mostly what we've got here. You'd be surprised how large an Astrologian's Planisphere creature can get, and you'd be surprised how many tokens Fabricator and especially Emissary can put on board just within a turn or 2. That's how we're going to win the majority of our games, but we still do have a lot of games where we go off and do the thing the way we're supposed to, and that is going to be our example game this week. I had a lot to choose from, and a lot of them do just involve Planisphere winning the game, or us getting in with a bunch of flyers, but the reason I chose the example game that I did this week is because it kind of shows us doing everything that the deck wants to do. Not only do we go off and get more or less the perfect start and have a huge board of creatures on turn 3, but we also finish the game the way I've been talking about by not using Octopus, not using Emissary, not using a bunch of these cards that I've been talking about so far. We just win an honest game of Magic at the end of the day. So today we're going to show you an example game where we kind of do everything the deck wants to do, and I gotta say, it's not a super rare occurrence. Now we go first, as we start this one against Sir Joe's the Ambitious. We throw down a Spire Bluff Canal, and then we throw down Mirada, aka Lady Octopus. Our opponent doesn't really have much of a turn 1 play, so we go and we put a counter on Mirada. Then we're going to play a Multiverse Passage, so you get to see both new cards from the Spider-Man set in this thing, and we throw down Cryogen Relic. That puts 2nd counter on Mirada, and we draw a Chainsaw. We briefly consider using the ability to throw down the Astrologian's Planisphere, but instead we just say go. Opponent plays a 2nd land and a Firebrain Scheme, aka Heroes Hangout. Remove a couple of cards from the top of their library. They kit a Lightning Strike off of it, and then Bolt Wave us, so it's that kind of party. Their end of turn, we will use the ability on Mirada to get a free Astrologian's Planisphere at instant speed. We untap, and then we go ahead and activate Mirada's ability on our turn to get a Pinnacle Emissary down. Now we can go ham. We throw down a Soul Guide Lantern, counter on the Astrologian's Planisphere creature, remove the Firebrain Scheme, and then we can opt. That's going to get us yet another card and another counter on Murata. Now, we can get in for 3 with the Astrologian's Planisphere creature and just say go. So that is 4 creatures on turn 3, but we're playing against removal.deck, so they use Lightning Strike to take out the big Planisphere creature and then play another Firebrain Scheme. This time they're going to get a Burst Lightning off of it. Jeez, a lot of removal over there, but we're just going to draw a card here and use the Soul Guide Lantern to put a counter on Murata. She's at 5, that's a lot. So this turn what we're going to do is just suit up a flyer with the Astrologian's Planisphere, play a Chainsaw targeting nothing, just so we get a counter on the Planisphere creature, get in for 5, and put them at 12. But again, we're up against a deck with a lot of removal, so they Burst Lightning on Murata, fearing that we might perhaps end up playing a huge thing. And then they Lightning Strike our Emissary. Again, just removal.deck over there. What are you going to do about it? We're going to finish this game is what we're going to do. Cryogen Relic comes down, counter on the Planisphere wearing Drone over there. And then we can suit up the other Drone with a Chainsaw and get in for 6 here, which opponent apparently doesn't have an answer to. They've certainly spent a lot of their removal this game. They play Bayo, which is actually Electro, I believe. And then they're just going to wild ride, and then turn inside out here, basically being like, yeah, I'm going to lose this one, but check out this cool thing I can do. So in the end, we pick up the dub. Good game, opponent. Now, that is Itsky Lewitsky for this one, but it's important this time, especially to get down there. Let me know how you felt about it, because even though I am satisfied with the build that I put in front of you, I try to be every time, it wins enough games for my taste at least, I still feel like this deck could be missing some sort of either late game engine that allows us to keep pushing, like Prof's Eidetic Memory, for instance, or we're missing a big late game KO punch that a lot of decks pack right now, a form of reach like the Endstone that I didn't end up playing. So if you've got any ideas for stuff like that, then I am all ears. Let me know down there in the comments section. Apart from all that, I guess the last thing I want to tell you is that if you wanted to, it would mean a lot to me if you'd join us Thursday nights. I think that's the night I'm releasing this, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at twitch.tv/sbmtgdev, where we will be playing some jank, link in the description. This week I'm not sure what we're doing, but I'm leaning towards a Moreland deck, which I think is called Lewis on MTG Arena on Through the Omen Pass. I like to pretend that Louis is actually Louis from Interview with the Vampire, Brad Pitt's character. That's the lore in my head, but is that too much information? I'm not sure. That's a good movie, but one way or the other, just come over there if you feel like it. Again, link in the description. But that's basically it. Check out the Patreon. You can vote on what decks we do around here. Like the video. It's a button shaped like a thumb. They made it easy for you down there. And then subscribe. I think that's what you... Pretty sure that's how you say it. Subscribe to the channel. Trying to get to 150K right now. We're not too far away. Be part of that march. But anyway, y'all, I'm going to let you go for the rest of your day. And then I'm going to let the patrons pick what decks we do next. I think it's probably going to be Anti-Venom. Either way, that's all I got for this one. That is Allski Kowalski. I am Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.